Short on local water supplies and long on regulatory requirements? Do a deep dive with us by listening to the Full Circle podcast to learn how Las Virgenes Municipal Water District and the Triunfo Water and Sanitation District are meeting 21st century water supply challenges for a portion of the Los Angeles and Ventura County regions.
Welcome to the Full Circle podcast, where we are chatting about all things water in the Las Virgenes Conejo region. My name is Riki Clark. I'm your host today, and I'm joined by my colleague and good friend and our project manager for the Pure Water Project, Oliver Slosser. Thank you for joining us, Oliver.
Thanks for having me.
So here at the Full Circle podcast, we, like I mentioned earlier, like to talk about all things water specific to our region and indeed throughout the state of California, specifically the Las Virgenes Triunfo Pure Water Project, which is set to go full scale in 2028 and will be supplying a brand new local supply of water to our region. 100% of our water is imported, like we have talked about extensively in our past episodes, and we very badly need a local source of water, and this is the project that is going to make that happen. So it is certainly an auspicious time to work in water and sort of just exist in California, right? We're dealing with this new concept, I should say, of climate whiplash, where we will for several years be in the worst drought of our lives, record dry month back to back to back, resulting in unprecedented water restrictions, specifically in our area, because we are something called state water project dependent, right? That just means that we get all of our water from the state water project and it is imported from about 400 miles away. So because we are dependent on that one source, when drought hits, we feel it, right? And so, we dealt with that for several years. And then all of a sudden, this winter is like one of the second wettest winter, or I think the snowpack is like at the second highest it's ever been or something.
Yeah, close to probably 100% above what it normally is, or what the average is. And yes. I think over 30 inches in our region alone of rain.
Yes, and this gets dropped right as we are still in drought, and after just a few months, seemingly a lot of people would say that we are completely out of the drought. Now that's kind of a contentious thing to say, right? Because there are a lot of different factors you have to take into account, historical and snowmelt, stuff like that. But indeed, we essentially went from one extreme to another in basically a few months. And as water managers throughout the state, that can be very difficult to deal with, and especially because it's not something that we're used to, right? These sort of extremes in water patterns haven't been the norm in California. And when we're talking about water allocations and snowfall and the hydrology behind it all, we tend to work in averages, right? The thing about that is we don't really have averages anymore.
Yeah, we're usually on one side or the other of an average, and I'd be the first one rooting for an end to our drought. But I mean, even if that is the case, there's so many drivers for us to develop this local source of water, not just water scarcity, but energy efficiency, not having to import our water from 400 or 500 miles away, as well as water security. There's when we're fully dependent on importing our water from a single source, it carries risk with it. So the ability to produce our own water locally helps mitigate that.
Yes, certainly. And our GM, Dave Peterson, likes to say that local water is sort of like your crown jewel of water, right? I think he says specifically groundwater, but we don't have that here. But if we can create a local source of water in a different way using innovation, which is what we're doing with the Pure Water Project, that is also a crown jewel. Essentially, diversifying your water sources, right?
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
The name of the game.
Absolutely. We're blessed with a lot of natural beauty in our area, but we unfortunately are not blessed with a groundwater reservoir much to speak of, or the type of surface water that you would need to support the population that we have down here. So being able to develop something like pure water, where we are able to beneficially reuse water that we would otherwise send to the Pacific Ocean, would be a huge benefit for us, and again would really help our water security in the region.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the Pure Water Project, Las Virgenes Triunfo, is essentially our answer and our solution to this climate whiplash that we've been dealing with. When we have one source of water that's stressed by way of drought or other natural disasters, anything like that, we're able to pull from another one and not be 100% dependent on that one source. And so what the Pure Water Project is, and we've talked about this in previous episodes, but it utilizes a 3-step advanced purification process, aptly titled the Advanced Purification Process, to essentially take highly treated recycled water that is the product of our tertiary wastewater treatment process that we currently just use for irrigating, and then it sends it through another very effective process to essentially treat it beyond drinking water standards. So this is like really this right here. This is the pure water created at our demonstration facility, is essentially some of the cleanest water that you can get. This is literally nothing but H2O. It hasn't been fortified yet, hasn't had minerals added. It is pure H2O. That is something that we are able to now create locally by way of this project. We are doing it actively right now with our demonstration project. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we'll be going full scale in 2028. But let's chat a little bit. Let's wax poetic about our demonstration project. It's been going for a couple of years now. There are two main purposes for this scaled down pilot project, essentially. It's a pilot. It actively treats the water using a scaled down version of the process. We have it here at our headquarters in Calabasas. We are essentially able to allow our operators and our engineers and all of our staff and well, not all of our staff, but appropriate staff, the opportunity to not just gain a familiarity, but a mastery of the process before we scale it and start serving it to all of our residents and customers. Work out any unique kinks or adjustments that we need to figure out specific to, our area and our project. And then additionally, it gives us the opportunity to invite the public in, come learn about advanced purification, come and see the technology and the infrastructure up close and personal, and then come taste the water so that you can see that this is effective. You can see the water, you can see that it's clear. You'll see me, since I lead the tours, drinking it with you, and you'll see that I'm pretty much in good health, right? Like I haven't grown like a second elbow or like keeled over dead. I mean, I'll drink it right now for optics. But yeah, so it's all about building trust. It's all about making sure that our public is properly educated and they know what it is and what it isn't. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. We really want to get into the who, what, when, where, and why of this project. And so that's why I wanted to invite Oliver Slosser, again, our project manager and our lead engineer. So we're just going to chat a little bit about it and kind of go over high level some of the things about the project. So before we get into that, Oliver, can you just talk a little bit about your position and your background in water and engineering?
Absolutely. Yeah, and thanks for having me today. It's really great to talk about this project. It's a project I've been following for the better part of my career, and I'm very excited to be leading for the district and for the JPA. So I actually grew up in the district in Agoura, Calabasas, and Malibu, and so I grew up drinking this water. Went to school in Northern California, and then came back down here for my master's and started working for a private engineering firm out in Pasadena. While I was with that firm, we actually were part of the team that helped define the Pure Water Project, and so essentially Las Virgenes have been looking at a way to balance its seasonal imbalance of recycled water supply and demand for several decades, and the solution to that was going to be building a new reservoir. For those of you who know, the district is lies within the National Recreation Area for the Santa Monica Malibu Mountains. So building a new dam and reservoir is pretty difficult when you're dealing with such a place of natural beauty. So when I was with this consulting firm, we took a look at some other ways to balance supply and demand, as well as to comply with new regulations for discharging effluent tertiary treated recycled water from our Tapia water reclamation facility. So of the, I think, 6 concepts that were kind of developed during that project, one of them was the Pure Water Project. And so it really accomplishes quite a few goals. As we were talking about, it develops a new source of drinking water for the region, which is incredibly important. But really, primarily, what the project is addressing is compliance with the environmental regulations for the Malibu Creek watershed. Right now, our Tapia Water Reclamation Facility creates Title 22 compliant recycled water. So that's recycled water that you can use on medians, parks. It's good for everything except actually drinking.
Right.
And so when we don't have enough demand for that water, it gets discharged into Malibu Creek and eventually to Surfrider Beach and into the Santa Monica Bay. There's been studies by the EPA, and essentially what's happened in recent years is the water quality limits for that water have become more stringent, and to the point where the amount of treatment needed at Tapia would cost quite a bit to implement. And so it was that driver that caused the JPA board to look at other options and to figure out, well, if we're going to spend this money, what other benefits can we get from it? And that's kind of where Pure Water came from.
Right. Anytime you're talking about, 100 million plus, it's like, okay, what else can I get from it?
Yeah.
This is a lot of money.
Yeah, because we would have been spending that money to continue to send it out to the Bay. And so if we're going to spend that kind of money, why not be able to use that beneficially, especially if we can do it in a safe and tested way?
Especially using a process that is tried and true, right? So when we give tours, we have a video that we created, and it talks about some of the other countries in the world that have used this process. I know Singapore is one, Australia is another.
Belgium,
yes,
yeah.
Exactly. Other states just within, the United States have used it. Obviously, you think about that water reuse graphic, a bunch of different places just within California, right? Doing different renditions of this process. And also, a lot of people don't know this, but there's no local water source up in space. Like, all they have is the big tanks that are on the International Space Station. So do you think that they bring in new water from like the deep space? No, they have to beneficially use and reuse their water as well. And this is the process that allows them to do that. So if our biggest and brightest minds up in space can trust this technology, then we should be able to as well. Right?
Absolutely. It's a great point. And we were talking about the demonstration facility earlier. It's good to point out that our demonstration facility, it serves all the purposes that you mentioned, but we're not testing this technology from fresh. We're not the groundbreakers as far as this technology. It's been used around the globe for decades. What we're doing with our demonstration is, as you said, we're training our staff, we're reaching out to the public, and we're also just refining the process for our particular water. There's going to be, there's lots of different equipment, materials out there for how to build these types of plants. So, it allows us to figure out which membranes work the best for our water.
Right.
How does our water, does it scale in our concentrate line? So it answers specific questions for our water, but it's by no means are we the trailblazers in this technology.
Oh, you mean the guinea pigs?
Yes, definitely not the guinea pigs. This has been around for decades, well before I even started in engineering.
Yes, we are not the guinea pigs. We would never make our customers the guinea pigs.
No.
Let's get into the water.
Yeah.
Can you talk about what makes this water so, and I'm putting up air quotes. Oh, you can see because we're recording, pure?
Absolutely. So I think you mentioned before, it goes through three distinct processes as it goes through our the advanced water treatment plant. So the first one is microfiltration or ultrafiltration. So this is a canister with thousands of little mini tubes, and each of those tubes have just teeny pore openings. I mean, so small that certain viruses can't even get through. So first, the water passes through that ultrafiltration, and this is well above and beyond what you're going to find in your Brita at home or your common filters. Exactly. This is some high tech filtration, and so not only does that serve as a first barrier for bacteria and viruses, but it also gets the water ready for the next step, which is reverse osmosis. And so once it passes through ultrafiltration, it then goes to RO membranes, and so this uses reverse osmotic pressure in order to create a pressure gradient and push that water across these membranes. And these are even smaller openings,
right,
and block even stuff that the filters couldn't before it. And so that's really where we get a lot of our virus inactivation, and it that's where we get a lot of our cleaning. And so even from that process, there may be a few things left over. And now we're talking about logarithmic removal of some of these constituents. So it's, if you're starting,
Can you talk about log removal a little bit? Give some context there.
Yeah, absolutely. So the guidelines set up for how to prove that we're treating this water to the level that has been set by the state standards is it has to meet certain log removal of virus, of of 3 different categories essentially. And so when we say a 9 log removal, it's not removing 9 times of the stuff. It's if there are a 1 with 9 zeros of stuff in there, there's only 1 of them left over at the end of it. So each log removal is a factor of 10. And so a 9 log removal of virus, for instance, is removing, if there's, I'm not great with my huge numbers, but a 1 with 9 zeros, I'm pretty sure is a trillion. And so it's 1 part per trillion left when you're done with it. And so that reverse osmosis is removing a lot of stuff. And then the third process is called ultraviolet advanced oxidation process. And so essentially it's using ultraviolet light, which has an ability to break down chemical bonds. And now we're talking about things that are even in solution. So salts, like beyond the size of virus, we're talking about, an Na, a sodium and a chloride molecule. And it's breaking bonds at that chemical level. And then an oxidant is added to it, essentially bleach,
right?
But to a level that is then also destroyed and removed within the process. So
we're basically zapping it with like high intensity UV light and then disinfecting it.
Exactly. And that oxidant is also grabbing those constituents and making that UV light even more effective at breaking the bonds and removing it from the water.
So that's more of like a chemical process. The first 2 steps you talked about were membrane processes, right?
More physical, mechanical. Yeah.
Right. So specifically with reverse osmosis, I mean, the holes in those membranes are so tiny. I mean, you can't even like measure them with like the most advanced microscopic instrumentation, right? So it's super effective already.
Yeah.
But that third step, that UV light and that advanced oxidation, really kind of acts as like a fail-safe, right? If you had a tiny little sneaky little virus that was able to sneak through.
It'd have to be pretty tiny, yeah.
Yeah, or like, some kind of pharmaceutical that was broken down super tiny and it got through, theoretically, it's not escaping that UV light.
Right. And we were just doing a tour the other day, and we were talking about there's a metric that you take of the water before it enters the UV, and it's how much of that light transmits through the water, basically how clear the water is.
Right. That's turbidity, right?
So turbidity, it would be a measure of that as well. And essentially that this water is at, I believe it's at like 97 to 98% transmittance for the light. So there's basically nothing in this water left to even reflect the light. So this UV is going all the way through it, and then, as I said, we're adding that oxidant as well to make it even more effective at breaking any residual bond. So it's very pure water, and it to the point where once it is through those processes, water is probably the best, one of the best solvents that we have in
the universal solvent.
Right. Yeah, in chemistry, exactly. So it's polar, but typically, it doesn't take stuff out of our body because it has stuff in it. It has minerals and different constituents in it.
It's fortified.
Yeah. Right. And so when it comes out of this process, it's stripped of a lot of that. So it even has to be conditioned back into a point where it wouldn't be, and it wouldn't be harmful, but just to a point where it'd be more palatable. Something that we're used to drinking, because just the water that we're used to drinking day to day out of the tap or even from bottled water does have constituents. It does have minerals and salts and things in it. So,
and those minerals need to be in the water. You have this idea, and it really is this, like, for a lot of people, like, nebulous idea of pure water. They want to drink the cleanest, purest water, but it's like when you actually have pure water, it's considered aggressive.
Yes.
And it's for the reasons that you mentioned. The charge of these molecules is such that they want to bind themselves with something, and if it's not minerals that are added or mixed in, it's going to be the, vital minerals in your bones. If you drink too much of this over a long period of time,
right,
it's going to be compromising the integrity of like iron pipes if you were to use iron pipes to move this water, which is why we will not be using iron pipes to move this water. But I just say that to say that, you know, you have some may have this idea of pure water, but when you get into, you know, the chemistry of it, no, your water needs to be fortified. You know, if you're washing your dishes and you let them out to dry and you see a slight white residue that's not like chemicals that we add to make you sick, that's likely just like calcium.
Or, exactly.
I mean? It's harmless, but there's a reason why there are minerals to your water, just like there's a reason why there's a chlorine residual added to drinking water so that it stays safely disinfected in transport.
Yeah.
Right?
And, you know, it's been a few years since I've taken my water chemistry classes, but yeah, I mean, it's the difference between when you hear about hard water versus soft water coming from your shower. And, you know, that's all talking about minerals and these other constituents that are found commonly in water. And so for our project, you know, the pure water, the supply that we're going to get from Tapia and what we're going to be sending through the AWPF, we're hoping that this will produce somewhere around 15% of what our annual normal demands are. So what that means is once we produce the water, it's not going straight into the pipe. We're creating this water under what's called indirect potable reuse. So first we create the water, but then it gets blended into our Las Virgenes reservoir where we have our imported water supply from Metropolitan, which comes from the State Water Project from Northern California.
Right.
So all that water is surface water that, you know, has those minerals and stuff. So this does get blended back in, and then it goes through another entire treatment plant,
Correct.
the Westlake filtration plant, and then it gets served to customers. So what this water ends up being is a supplement to our raw supply of water that is, you know, then treated and served to our customers.
Right. So this is a specific type of indirect potable reuse, and it's called surface water augmentation or like reservoir augmentation. Different kinds of indirect potable reuse would include like groundwater augmentation. But again, as we mentioned in previous episodes, we don't use our aquifers. We don't have active aquifers in our area for a number of reasons. So we keep it all above ground, and we have the resources, we have the processes for that. Additionally, that augmentation and the reservoir itself acts as like an environmental buffer. So like you mentioned, the water will be stored there. It's going to get mixed, but it's also going to undergo another tried and true treatment process that we've been using for decades that we know works, and it'll be monitored at that step as well. So you have this idea of, you know, that environmental buffer, right? So the water is treated effectively, it becomes, you know, pure water, but then you have to inject it into, well, we do reservoir injection, you can do groundwater, but can you kind of talk about the differences in this type of indirect potable reuse compared to, say, like San Diego? Sure.
So, I mean, surface water augmentation, as you said, there's surface water augmentation, there's groundwater recharge. We're really using the assets that we have. And so we already have a Las Virgenes reservoir, which historically has served as a 6-month emergency supply. And this gets back to us being wholly dependent on imported water. So if there is ever anything to happen with our feeder, we get a majority of our water through a single pipe. We do have some interconnections and some smaller pipes, but in the case of an earthquake or even just for scheduled maintenance, if that were to go down, we would need a bank account in order to serve our customers. And so that's what Las Virgenes Reservoir has historically been for us.
Our savings account.
Our water savings account,
it's
which
a contingency. We are prepared, people.
Yes,
just know that.
Yeah, and especially with you know, droughts that can extend 10 years, it's always good to have a savings account. And so this will utilize that in a new way. We'll still have that storage, but we'll be utilizing the reservoir on a more regular basis, and we'll be taking the pure water and blending it with our Metropolitan supply. And so I guess getting back to what an environmental buffer is, it serves a couple purposes. One, it gives some time between when that water is produced and when that water is served, just to ensure that it's not going directly into pipes, and that there is some buffer there, some leeway. Mm-hmm. That being said, I know the state right now is working on direct potable reuse, which will take the environmental buffer out of the equation. It'll have higher requirements for monitoring and how well the water is being treated, but would allow agencies to go directly from the advanced treatment plant to distribution pipes within the system. It's something that's on our radar, but we're pursuing this indirect potable reuse.
Right.
It also it gives some. it may give some additional cleaning benefits, but I think what's really important to note is the guidelines that are set up by the state and the guidelines that we need to follow for a type of project like this. We don't actually get any credit for whatever additional treatment those buffers provide. So whether it's the filtration of the ground and groundwater recharge, or whether it's microorganisms within the reservoir that are cleaning the water, if it is adding any benefit, it's not something that we get credit for. We need to show that we're achieving our log removal values, our required water quality requirements through that plant alone. So it's
through the advanced purification plant.
Exactly.
So basically during and after the environmental buffer, all of that filtration and cleaning that we're doing is basically like extra credit.
Yes, it's extra credit, and it's also, again, a buffer. It gives a bit of separation between when that water is produced and when that water is served to customers. For the San Diego project, I don't want to talk too much about. I have a general understanding of their project, but from what I understand, their reservoir size, as well as how much water that they take, means that I think there may be less of a amount of detention time is what they call it, amount of time that water sits in that reservoir prior to it being served. So I believe that they may have some different requirements of how they need to treat. Again, I'm not as read in with their project, sure. But that's a little bit of the difference there. And then places like Orange County, who've been doing this for, I think, close to 20 years, if not more, theirs is a groundwater replenishment, and there's lots of places in California that have that groundwater replenishment scheme too. And they're very lucky to have a groundwater basin with which to use. But there's also there's pluses and minuses with that as well. As we talked about before, this water is coming out incredibly pure, can act as more of a solvent than typical potable water, just because of how clean it is. So there's always the possibility of leaching stuff from the ground when you put it in the groundwater. It has the benefit of being a natural filter, but there's also constituents within groundwater that you may not want in your water supply. Absolutely. So there's monitoring that they have to do once they draw that water back out. They also have to treat that water again, typically, before it's served to customers. So it's I don't know if one's better than the other. They're both very well tested, very well established, and very well monitored processes. We do a lot of water quality testing.
And you make a really interesting point that you have to point out to a lot of people. Different regions, different water agencies, they have different challenges when it comes to their water source, treatment, water quality. And that's why you have different renditions and iterations of what seems like the same process, right? Some people have groundwater, some people are all on the surface. There are different contaminants that come with that. And so that's why you have different solutions. And that's also largely why water management is oftentimes localized, sometimes regionalized, but there isn't like a one size fits all in water. And that's because it's different.
Yeah, we've all got to play the hand that we're dealt, whether it's the size of your reservoir, whether it's, whether you have a groundwater basin or not, how many people you're serving. This project will serve primarily LVMWD's 80,000 customers, maybe to a smaller extent. Our partner, Triunfo Water and Sanitation Districts, they're 20 to 30,000 customers. But even that, when it comes to the water that we're producing, we're going to need to utilize an interconnection to even physically get that water to that service area. So we all have to make the best use of the assets we have. That's why we're very lucky to have Las Virgenes Reservoir and have that as part of it.
Indeed, the varying landscape that makes California such an appetizing place to live also gives us some challenges in water management, but there are solutions, and the Pure Water Project is one of them. So can you talk about why, so I mentioned earlier that this project is going full scale in 2028. We sort of began the road to pure water back in 2013. Can you talk about why a project like this takes as long as it does? I'm sure many of us already have an idea. Anytime, something needs to get done on a scale like this, or just in public sector in general, it can take some time. But can you speak specifically to this project?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many stages to a project like this, and really to make it successful and to to bring everybody on board with us. And so, going back to, my first touch point with it was really in 2016, and that was really just defining the problem and figuring out which makes the most sense given the challenges we were trying to meet and the assets that we have at our disposal. We have a wastewater treatment plant that is very space confined. It's in Malibu Canyon. There's not a lot of opportunity to expand that, so that's one driver. We had to remove our flow from the creek. That's another driver. We wanted to make the best use out of our water, and we wanted to develop a local supply. So just there, it took a couple of years to figure out what's the best project to address these challenges in the most cost-effective way. Then once that's decided, then you go into pre-design and pre-study. You figure out what does mixing in the reservoir look like. You do a feasibility study to figure out, is this actually feasible? Because having the idea and then putting pen to paper and really penciling it out and looking at costs is takes a while.
Yeah, we got to make sure that we're using these public dollars responsibly.
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely, and then there's one facet that we've just got finished with at the end of last year, the environmental portion of it. So once we have a defined project, then we start developing what's called a programmatic environmental impact report. So we look at as much as we can in that report. How does this affect biological resources? How does what noise is created? What pollution is created? What's the full environmental impact as far as we can tell with a project like this? And that's a process where we bring members of the public out, where we reach out to our neighboring cities and agencies, and we get as much input as we can to make sure that we're not missing anything and that we're mitigating any of those environmental impacts to the extent possible.
And taking a holistic approach.
Absolutely, and all that pre-study and environmental work and and bringing on consulting partners. We're working with Jacobs Engineering as our owner's advisor. They've been working with us for I think over 2 years now, and so they bring their expertise and their global knowledge of these type of projects and bring it to bear on our specific circumstances, and we start developing what's called basis of design. And so that's kind of where we're at now. We have a basis of design for the plant, for the pipelines that are needed. That's another big challenge is when you're making this water, there's a waste product. There's what's called reverse osmosis concentrate. So it's the very high salty waste stream brine. Exactly. And so that needs to be disposed of properly. And it's we're talking about 1.5 million gallons a day of brine that will be created. And we're very blessed to live in a region where Cayugas Municipal Water District has had the forethought to build a regional brine disposal line. These types of projects are not specific to us. There's other folks in the region looking at cleaning up their groundwater supplies or other projects where brine would be created. And so Cayugas created this regional line that everybody can feed into, but it takes about 14 miles for us to get from our plant to that line. So planning how we get 14 miles of pipe through 3 different cities.
And it might seem counterintuitive, but this is also a bid for watershed protection, right? The Malibu coastline is highly protected. Our watershed is highly protected. And so having brine disposal on that coastline is just not going to happen. But what we can do is we can tap in, like you said, to that infrastructure that already exists that has an output a little bit further up the coast where it's more, like you said, environmentally sound, and that infrastructure is there to make sure that it has as little impact on the local environment as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're several miles out with their outfall. So instead of each of these projects having to do their own ocean outfall, we're able to tap into this regional line, and it allows us to also have a regional project, right? So we'll be able to take water hopefully from neighboring cities and agencies as well. A lot of that planning, just getting all those ducks in a row and what this project looks like. And so right now where we're at is procurement, and so that involves we're delivering this project under what's called progressive design build. And so
can you talk a little bit about that?
It's
such an interesting thing.
It's a pretty new it's been around for a while in different sectors, but for us, for our district, it's brand new. This is the first project we'll be doing as progressive design build. Typically the way we would do something is we would either ourselves or contract with a firm we we would do a design for something. And then once that design is completed, we take possession of it. Then we do what's called a public bid. And so we find a construction company who's willing to build that design for us.
That's the traditional way.
That's a traditional way, and it takes some time, and there's some risk associated with it in that, once we take that design, that's our design. And so we're standing behind it. And so any issues with that can cause to, there can be disagreement as to, if there's any mistakes.
Sure.
Progressive design build really is a partnership between us, the owner, the designer, the engineering firm who's doing the design, and the contractor. And we really form a partnership. They form what's called a design build entity.
We're big on partnerships here at the JPA,
partnerships,
by the way.
Absolutely. Regional ones as well as with our design builders. And so really what it allows us to do is design up to a certain extent and then really start building while the design is being progressed. And so it allows us, one, to cut through a lot of those disputes that could arise in the classic model, but also progress the project at a faster pace. And because those water quality standards I was talking about from Malibu Creek come into effect in 2030, we really needed to identify a way to deliver this project that was expeditious and would get us to that deadline. Right now we're about to release what's called a request for qualifications. That'll begin our procurement process for the AWPF, the building, as well as that 14-mile brine line. We're hoping to get somebody on board early next year, and then we will progress the design and then the construction from there, hopefully completing in 2028. But then even that, there's ancillary projects that'll be going on in parallel. So we need to make sure our existing infrastructure is up to snuff to be able to meet the new configuration. So we have pump stations that need to be upgraded. We need to add storage so that these plants don't like to see fluctuating amounts of flow coming into them. We want to be sure it's getting a steady amount of flow through these membranes. So
these are a lot of components that your layperson wouldn't typically think of, but that's why we do what we do. You know what I mean? This is a holistic approach. There are a lot of different things that go into making sure something like this is cost efficient and that it'll benefit our public the way that we're planning for it. So if it takes a little bit of time, that's okay, because you want to make sure you do it right.
It's a team effort.
It is.
And team almost feels like too small of a word, because there's so many folks who are, we have so many smart people, both from the consulting side, from inside our organization, from our partners in the region, who are helping to make this a success. And there's so many moving parts that, I guess the last thing too is just we want to be sure that we're doing it right.
Yeah.
We don't, we're not just throwing something out there. This is going to be a facility that we're going to rely upon in this region for decades to come. So, making sure that we're hitting all the regulations, making sure that, that we're a lot of times going above and beyond what the requirements are.
Absolutely.
And making a building that fits into this natural environment and looks nice. And we're working with our, right now the building is slated to go into Agoura Hills, which is a gorgeous city, and the buildings there are incredible. So we want to be in keeping with that natural beauty. So
especially since they're always so supportive of our projects as well. So we want to make sure that we do our due diligence and make sure that impact is as minimal as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah. The building that we're moving forward with right now, the AWPF, is in what's called the Ladyface Pacific Development Zone. And so Ladyface is this beautiful mountain in Agoura Hills, and our building will be right kind of at the base of that range. And so it's important to our board and to all of us to find something that blends in and is attractive to look at, and it's part of fits into the history of the city.
Absolutely. So in that same vein, we're in our demonstration phase. We are, we've had studies done. We're now looking for, contractors. We have some skin in the game now with the Pure Water Project. Can you talk about some of the challenges that have come up specifically for our projects, not necessarily for Pure Water in general, but for our region?
Yeah. So, one that's kind of common to the whole state right now, and really the country, inflation, prices, cost. So, one of the unique aspects of our Pure Water project is, we started talking about how this is a great source of local supply. First and foremost, we're doing this to comply with the regulations in Malibu Creek. So we need to do this project from a a pure cost per acre foot, which is typically what you would look at when you're developing a new source of water. Let's say you had a groundwater basin that you had that, and you're going to build a new well, you would look at how much it would cost on a cost per acre foot, and if that, made sense versus another source that you had. Really, our driver here is complying with these regulations. If we don't comply, then we are going to be, being hit with fines on a daily basis because we're not meeting what's called the TMDL, the total,
Right.
or our permit requirements. So, for that reason, the price is kind of the price, and we try to keep it as low as possible. The way we sort of see it is the price for the project is the price of compliance, and the cost of making the water is the operation and maintenance cost once that building is built.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
It's always important to emphasize. You're not necessarily paying for the water. You're paying for everything that goes into the quality and the convenience of making sure that the cleanest water is delivered to your home and then properly disposed of.
Absolutely. And none of that is to say that we're not cost conscious, because we absolutely are.
Yeah.
Our first responsibility is to be good stewards of our ratepayers' money. We take that very seriously.
Yes.
And so, we went through a process this year as we started developing the project more and more and getting to what we consider about a 10% design stage. More aspects of what was needed, what was not needed became clear, as well as the market conditions, how much materials were costing, how much lead times were for certain equipment. And so we went through a process last year of updating our price. We had for a while been estimating a price about $256 million for the full program. We took another look at that. There were some additional features that needed to be added, such as improvements to pump stations, additional storage, as well as costs had just gone up. And
inflation, baby. We're all feeling it.
Yeah,
everywhere.
No one gets away from it.
No one. Not even your local water provider.
No. So we went through a diligent process of looking at what that cost was. We're now projecting a cost of $364 million. There will be another stage once we have the design builder where there will be an actual what's called a GMP, a guaranteed maximum price, and that's when we'll really have a lot more finality on what the cost will be. But on the other side of that, we're working really hard to mitigate how that impacts our ratepayers. So
right.
We were incredibly lucky last year. Lucky as well as, thankful to our consultants who really did a great job for us. But we secured $10.2 million with the Bureau of Reclamation as a grant. So that's not money that needs to be paid back. That's just money supporting our program.
As some may put it, we like to make use of other people's money.
Yes.
As much as possible.
If they'll give it to us, we have good ways to spend it.
That's how we're keeping our ratepayer impact as low as possible.
Yes, absolutely. And so, we received that. We are right now in the process of applying for different funding low interest funding opportunities through the state and the federal government. So this is things like the state revolving fund, SRF, the WIFIA loan program. There's some programs through Metropolitan, their local resources program. So we're pursuing any and all dollars that make sense to pursue. And then we also, our incredible finance department, they are constantly working on our rate structure and how I don't want to talk for finance because it's certainly not my wheelhouse, but
right.
They look at it as far as what if we were to not get any money and this is how we'd finance it. If we get this, it goes down to this and it goes down to this. So they look at the worst case scenario, they look at the best case scenario, and they have a plan in place to really minimize these impacts to the project. And at the end of the day, the water that we're importing from Metropolitan is only going to get more expensive over time. Those energy costs are only going to increase, and our imported water costs are only going to get higher. So the more that we can develop a local supply, the better off we are in the long term.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So switching gears a little bit, with this demonstration project, we mentioned earlier that outreach is a big part of this, and getting public buy-in and establishing that trust with the public. That's important. People want to make sure that the water that they are being served is safe. And there have been, incidents in the past, decade or so and in other places where people had a water supply that was threatened and they were rightfully upset, and they're still dealing with, the fallout from that. So can you talk a little bit about what the JPA is doing to protect public health with this project?
Absolutely. I thought you were going to say public outreach too, because I was going to say I should be interviewing you guys for that. You guys do such an amazing job with public outreach,
Thank you.
and I think our demonstration project and the work that we've done to reach out to our to the public and inform them what we're doing has just been incredible. But yes, from a public health standpoint, and I'm no doctor by any means, and not an expert in this field, but really it starts at the state level and these guidelines that are set up for the project. And so there was an intensive process at the state level to look at the human health effects of potable reuse of this water, and how it affect it was a process that involved the public, involved public comment, involved putting together expert panels of medical doctors, toxicologists, chemists, and so
heavy hitters,
yes. And so that's really what goes into when I was talking about the log removals of virus or certain constituents as indicators of the quality of this water. That's where a lot of that comes from, and where those thresholds were set. They looked at where does the threat to human health start, and then let's throw in a bunch of conservative factors on top of that. Let's get well below that.
Sure, yeah.
And so we're following or going above and beyond all of those. And so that's really our starting off point as far as protecting human health. But above and beyond that, we devise our own independent advisory panel, not just to answer technical questions, but to look at the efficacy of our processes, how well we're treating the water. The demonstration project has given us 2 years of robust data set to show exactly what the product water is looking like. I've been tasting this water for 2 years, and
Same.
yeah, it's delicious. I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, and my having the background I do in water and how where all of our water comes from, this is high quality water, and would most likely be my first choice of water that I drank.
I know if we could drink this all the time, it would be in that hydro flask right now.
I'd have one of those demonstration facilities in my backyard for
Right.
sure. There's just a Stanford study that came out that concluded that recycled water, and when I say recycled water, we're of course talking about potable,
Advanced purified
purified
yes.
water is of the highest quality. And so, it's something that we, our purview here as a water district is not to be, is not to, pilot this stuff as to be the first testers of this technology, or to
The guinea pigs.
yeah exactly the guinea pigs, or to make our own determination on
Right.
how healthy something is.
This is science backed already.
It's science backed. Our job is to follow the regulations, and also to verify. Trust but verify. And so we are, we follow all the regulations, again, going above and beyond in a lot of instances.
Right.
And then we're also doing our own work, and we're applying it to our own water, and making sure that, for instance, if we're able to get 10 log removal where we need 9,
Mm-hmm.
we'll get 10.
That's what we're gonna go for.
Yeah, exactly.
We
So
like going above and beyond.
yeah, we're not just just trying to get right under the bar. We're
Right.
trying to get as low under as we can.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, this is the kind of innovation, advanced purification in the Pure Water Project that we have to rely on moving into the future, right? We talked about earlier climate whiplash. The weather is getting real unpredictable. And we have to make sure, and we are going to make sure through this project, that our water supply is reliable, and that water is never going to stop flowing out of that tap. That is our purpose for living, Oliver.
Yes.
As water managers in the state, this is what we were put on earth to do. And with this project and the demonstration phase, I mean, outreach to the public is an important part of that. We need to make sure that people know what's going on. They know the who, what, when, where, and specifically the why, so that people can also sort of take responsibility for their own water use. And
Mhm.
that's what we have asked our customers to do, especially in the face of, drought over the past couple of years before this winter, is rethink how you're using water. We know that 70% of residential water use happens outdoors. So we're asking, hey, how can we cut that water use down? Oh, we know, maybe rethinking that, thirsty turf that's not really native here, that takes up a lot of water. We know that having it in small amounts is cool. People have dogs and kids that, want to play on the grass, but can we, reduce that non-functional turf and maybe think about some, climate appropriate landscaping. And so we have an entire demonstration sustainability garden actually here on site. It is. Yeah. It's beautiful. It's a living and breathing testament to sustainability. And it's right outside the Pure Water demonstration facility. Anyone can come whenever to check it out and see how you can implement this, California-friendly, climate-appropriate landscaping at home so you can cut down on your water use. And in the meantime, the JPA is working hard on the Pure Water project to make sure that we have a reliable and sustainable water source moving into the future.
Yeah, it's interesting. The recycled water for us, the non-potable, the purple pipe stuff that you use for your lawns, it's always been historically a disposal method for us, and there hasn't been much of a push for conservation on it, because at the end of the day there's certain times of the year we can't send it down the creek, and so it's helpful if we have that demand or if people want to put it on their lawns, but that's changing now, and it's changing all over the state. And now that we're building this facility that has a higher use as potable water, as mentioned before, we're very blessed in this service area. We have a lot of big properties and big lawns, and it's a beautiful area to live, and we tend to have a higher outdoor water usage than a lot of other areas in the state. But it's going to be just as important to conserve that water through the sprinklers as it is conserving it through the shower or your kitchen faucet in the future, because it's all going to be one water.
Yeah. And so if we can maximize that beneficial reuse, right, by closing that sustainability loop, then we are essentially doing what we came here to talk about, bringing water full circle.
Full circle. Every drop we make here is one less drop that we got to ship 400 miles from up north. So it's all benefit. Yeah.
Well, Oliver, this has been a great discussion. Thank you so much for joining me on the Full Circle podcast.
Riki, I really appreciate being here. It's always great talking to you, and love that we're doing this. I just love getting this information out there. It's a project I'm super proud of, and so it's really great talking to you today.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those listeners that are interested in coming to take a tour, you can hit me up, email me, visit our website to make a reservation. I do this all day. I like talking about pure water and sustainability. You can visit our website at ourpureh2o.com to learn a little bit more about the demonstration project and pure water, as well to make a reservation for upcoming tours. And come and check it out. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Full Circle podcast. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at LVMWD, on Instagram at Las Virgenes _MWD, and on Facebook at LVMWD. Find our Full Circle podcast on your favorite streaming service, or go to ourpureh2o.com and smash on the Full Circle podcast link for all other episodes.